All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about one of the most famous, and maybe infamous, political phrases of the last 20 years. But what if I told you its most powerful meaning wasn't the one everyone remembers? What if it was actually a boomerang designed to come right back at the person who threw it? Today, we're exploring a really fascinating critique that flips a well-known idea completely on its head.
And there it is. That's the line. It's from a 2012 campaign speech by then-President Barack Obama. Now, the original point was all about public investment. He was making the case that successful business owners, they didn't get there all by themselves. They relied on public goods, roads, bridges, schools, that we all built together. Pretty straightforward, and for a lot of people, a common sense argument.
But this is where things get really interesting. The analysis we're digging into today presents a totally different take. On the one hand, you've got that original meaning we just talked about, but on the other, the author flips it. They argue that modern socialist models depend on something they didn't build, all the wealth and, crucially, the price signals that a market economy creates. That right there is the core conflict we're going to unpack.
So, to really get the critique, first we have to understand the model that's being critiqued. And look, we're not talking about old-school, Soviet-style, state-run economies here. This is about modern, democratic socialist ideas, the kind you hear from writers like Matt Bruenig. The proposal is to use state ownership of capital to fund a really robust welfare state, and they point to real-world examples as a kind of proof of concept.
And these are the poster children for the idea. The argument usually points to places like Norway, with its absolutely massive sovereign wealth fund that's built on oil money, and even Alaska's permanent fund, which literally pays dividends to its residents. The concept is simple, right? The state owns a huge piece of the economic pie, and the profits from that ownership pay for things like healthcare, education, pensions, the whole shebang. On the surface, it looks like a perfect model. So what's the catch?
Well, this gets us to the absolute core question the author is asking. Are these examples a blueprint that any country can just copy and paste? Or are they just unique situations, total one-offs, basically born from a lucky break, like finding a winning lottery ticket buried in your backyard? This question is what pivots us right into the heart of the critique.
And here it comes, the boomerang. The author reaches back into the history of economics and pulls out a classic argument, one developed by the Austrian economists Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. It's an old idea for sure, but they're aiming it at a very, very new target.
Okay, so here's the key concept. It's called the economic calculation problem. Mises and Hayek basically argued that without the constant, messy, decentralized feedback of market prices, people just buying and selling stuff, a central planner is essentially flying blind. They have no real information to know whether it's better to build a new factory or a new hospital or what to even make in that factory in the first place. Prices, in this view, are information. And without them, the whole system just can't work efficiently.
So this leads to the author's main point, that these modern socialist models are basically taking for granted the very thing they want to replace. They create these detailed plans for how to redistribute all this wealth, but they just assume that the market's incredible engine for generating that wealth and the price information that guides it is just going to keep on running in the background no matter what. It's kind of like designing a fancy new sail for a ship without understanding that there's an engine below deck that's actually pushing the whole thing forward. All right, so let's put this theory to the test. Let's turn our lens back to the star witness for the prosecution, or the defense, depending on your view, Norway. Is its success really proof that this model works anywhere, or is there something else going on just beneath the surface? The source material uses this really powerful analogy to make its point. The argument is that Norway never actually had to solve the hard problem of creating wealth from scratch. Why? Because it was literally sitting on a massive reserve of oil and gas. All it had to do was pump it, sell it into the global capitalist market, and just clip the coupons, just collect the revenue. It wasn't a new economic blueprint, it was a windfall.
And this slide illustrates the central contradiction the author points out, using a classic framework called bootleggers and Baptists. So the Baptists are the moral visionaries, in this case, the people pushing for social equality and really aggressive climate action. But the entire system is funded by the bootleggers, the hydrocarbon exports that the climate activists, rightly, want to phase out. You've got a welfare state with a very high moral vision that's quietly being powered by an engine it says it wants to dismantle.
So, when you look at it through this lens, the final verdict is pretty stark. You take away the geological luck of all that North Sea oil, and you take away the global market that sets the prices and buys it, and suddenly the Norwegian model doesn't look like a scalable template for socialism anymore. It just looks like a country that has to solve the same tough economic problems as everybody else.
Which brings us to the author's final argument. And it's less about specific policies and more about, well, philosophy.
It's about a fundamental difference between the act of creating wealth and the act of distributing it.
According to this critique, the playbook kind of looks like this. Step 1, you observe the immense prosperity that a market economy can generate. Step 2, you design what you believe is a fairer, more equitable system to redistribute all that prosperity. But Step 3 is the critical and, according to this argument, the fatally flawed assumption that the engine of prosperity will just keep humming along, no matter how much you tinker with its core mechanics.
And there you have it. The boomerang comes all the way back around. That phrase, "you didn't build that," which was originally aimed at the entrepreneur, is now turned right back on the socialist planner. The message becomes, you didn't build the incredibly intricate, information-rich system of market prices that generated the surplus you now want to spend.
So this is the final side-by-side comparison. On the one hand, the entrepreneur is told they didn't build the physical and social infrastructure, the roads, the schools. But on the other hand, the counterargument to the planner is that they didn't build the economic infrastructure, that complex, emergent order of the market itself. The author argues both are foundational, but only one is being taken for granted by its critics.
And that's the final provocative question this whole analysis leaves us chewing on. When we talk about designing a better economy, are we talking about a philosophy for actually creating wealth in the first place? Or are we talking about a philosophy for spending a surplus that was created by a system we might not fully understand and could be damaging in the process? It's a powerful question and definitely one to think about.